Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today, Masechtas Chulin daf Tes Zayin. We're going to begin on the second line from the top. Omer Mar Hashoichet b'muchani, a person who shechs with a wheel, and doesn't mean like a rubber wheel from your car, but obviously it has the capacity to do a cutting of an animal's vesha and kana. Shchitasuk shera. So it's fine. You could use that. We've seen elsewhere it's the opposite. So kasha. It depends on what type of wheel we're talking about. Ha bitsarna de pachra, ha bitsarna de maya. So one is referring to a wheel which is a form of pottery. It says Rashi cheres. So because it's a earthenware vessel in which you're making, as v'chavero b'Daniel b'chaloimish on the Nebuchadnezzar. Okay. Anyway, so the shechita is kosher because it's being done by the person. You're the one who's actually doing the koyach of the moving of this wheel. However, if it's water that's moving it, then as Rashi says, shechita subsula shemayim megalgal noiso. It's the wheel that's doing it. Vein shechita zu mekoyach adam. And the shechita is not coming from the person. It needs to be that the shechita is done by the person. Let's see this Rashi, as we're going to see later on Daf Hamad Aleph. Nafal v'shachta shechita psul. Let's say it fell onto a knife. It's possible. So basically, you have to be the one that does this zvicha. It doesn't just happen. Okay. So that's answer number one. So how is it sometimes okay? So if you are the one that physically caused the water to pour onto this wheel for the wheel to move, so that's your koyach rishon. It's like you're the one that did it, and therefore the wheel is shchita. However, if it wasn't immediately, but it was sometime afterwards, it's already been going around a whole bunch of times, so then at that situation, it's already going to be not from your own koyach, because it's koyach sheni, it'll be possible. Question 8. Hasheichet b'muchani hanu gilgal v'shchi boy sakin v'gilgal v'shachad him shchatasuk shera. So it says like this: if the person is doing it, it's kosher. However, if let's say it's the water that's doing it, depends. Koyach rishon, it's kosher. Koyach sheni, shchitas psul. Okay. All right. So that's the first thing. This person who literally tied down his friend, some friend, and he all of a sudden opened up a dam and water started pouring on this poor guy who may chayev. So what do you mean? I didn't kill him, my time, because giri didehu diahanibe. The truth is, it was your arrows. It was like you did an action which caused him to die. It was your koyach. So it's considered, you're only chayev if it's koyach rishon. However, it's koyach sheni, and in that situation, you're not going to be chayev. Yosef Rav Achuri the Rabbi Chia committed the Rav Yosef Yom Rabbi Kaimer Menayin l'shchita shu b'tolish. So how do we know? We've been learning in yesterday's daf that shchita, the knife, is supposed to be detached from the ground, or you stick it into the wall. So again, it's tolish v'akach mechuber. How do we know it's supposed to be done that way? So the reason is shenever, because the pasuk says vayikach esmachelos lishcha. We saw this in Rashi. That when it comes to Akedes Yitzchak, that Avraham took this machelos, which is a knife, and to shecht. Obviously, the fact that it says he took it means that it was tolish. So Amalei Rav Rabbi Chia my kaimer. What exactly? How do we learn out the reason from here? Amalei Vav Dichsiv Oivta kaimer. It's referring to the there's like a vav that's written on the bark of a tree. It says Rashi kaimer tam shenu nachen kaimer. It means it's really not such a logical reason, just like a vav that happens to be floating out over there. It says Rashi says the machshel il shchita b'mechuber, because he actually holds that you could shecht with an attached knife. So he says this whole reasoning from this pasuk is not really a raya. What do you mean? It's a pasuk which seems to imply they're supposed to be done that way. No, Kra is reasoning to Avraham. Kamashmalon. Says Rashi, Shachad v'nizar shema l'yimtzatzur. Why did he bring a knife? He didn't have to. He could have shechted his son by using some other implement. Afil mechuber, maybe imo machelas. But he brought a knife just because he wasn't sure whether or not he'd be able to find a way to do the shechita. So in order to not have to delay in the mitzvah, so he brought a knife. But maybe that's not necessarily a raya that it's necessary. Okay. Omer Rava, Pshitali, Tosha was slave Chibra, which you saw yesterday, whether it works maybe with the Eved. So let's say the knife was tolish, and then you stick it into a wall. So when it comes to idol worship, it's considered to be detached. What does that mean? So let's look at Rashi. The Kaimalan in Masechtas Avodah Zarah we learn she'obid es haharim enu nesarim haharim. If let's say a person starts worshiping a mountain, so does that aser the mountain? The answer is no. Why? Because the pasuk says es Elohim Eloharim, that the idols are on mountains. V'lo harim Elohim, not that the mountains themselves are gods. Now, it is possible that people could worship mountains, but that's not going to aser mountain. So that's the drasha. So hanimili hard mechuber mikaro. Maybe the only time we say this is only if we're dealing with something like a mountain, because a mountain is mechuber from the very beginning. It was always attached. It's like earth. So maybe that's why we're lenient. Because what are you going to do? Aser the whole world? You can't aser the whole earth. People are going to bow down to earth? No. But let's say it was detached and then it became attached. And only from the time of it being attached, they served that. So therefore, this is telling us, again, going back, this is what the Gemara means, that Tosh B'Sov Chibroi is Habi Tosh. It's like any other Avodah Zarah which is detached, which obviously is Aser. So too this, even though now it's attached. Someone who bows down to his house, so then he can Aser. It says Rashi, of course, your friend can't Aser. You can't Aser Davar Shein Shaloi. However, you could Aser your own thing. Why? It must be because we're talking about that it was detached, so you had a bunch of pieces of wood, and then you built a house, which is now mechuber. Now, if it would be mechuber, then it shouldn't, in fact, be aser, because as we just said in Rashi, Elohehem Eloharim v'lo haharim Elohehem. So therefore, the fact that it must be, therefore, it's considered like it's tolish and it's aser. Le'inyan hechsher zerayim, when it comes to seeds and they're having shaychus to mikabel toma tanohi. There we have a machlokas tanoim, as Rashi says. Kol mashke shetchilasol ratzain. Let's say you have a liquid. In order for something to become tummy, it has to become liquid on it. Yad shachadam, one of the liquids. Now it has to also be that it's nichle, that you wanted that liquid to go on the thing. So let's say initially it was your desire. Says Rashi, even though at the end you weren't so interested, but since at the beginning you did want it there, so it's a machshir kabutuma. Says Rashi, that's only when it's coming down for something which is detached. If it was attached, then it's not mechuber. Like, for example, if liquid falls onto attached fruit, that doesn't mean that fruit is hechsher kabbatum. It's only once it's detached. As it says, Talmud Loimer kli, it has to be like a kli, something which is tolish. Ma kli miyuchid shehu tolish min akarka av koil, etc. So that's what Rashi says. Alma achshavinu l'tzarech tolish. If it was originally your machshava, that's what's tolish, which therefore it's something which is machshir. Machshirin l'tzarech mechuber lo machshirin. However, it was mechuber not. El imke nichle menefilas haperes l'soich, unless it was mamash nichle. Okay, that's a little bit of an intro that Rashi says. So it did not. Hakayfa kaira al kais. Let's say you flip over a plate over a wall. Bishvil she tudach harizeh b'chiyutan. In order that, as Rashi says, the plate should get liquid, there's some drippings, so it's a din of chiyutan, that if afterwards, im naflu achar kachal peris, if it fell into fruits, so therefore that liquid is b'chiyutan, it's royal and mekabel tuma. It's shaykh to mekabel, it's machshir mekabel tuma, because you wanted it that way. However, shil shul yilka hakaisel, that you just put it there so that the drippings won't ruin your wall, so to kind of like block the wall from getting wet, so you actually don't want it on there. So in that situation, en b'chiyutan. So haguvakasha. It sounds actually like a stira. Amrit initially said b'shil shetudach, that it should get moist. So harizeh b'chiyutan, that's considered machshir. Havishivil sheyudach hakaisel. What if you just want to wash the wall, not the kli, but the wall? Ein zeh b'chiyutan. Now what do we see? Why is it not b'chiyutan? Because a wall is an example of tol shemusat la'achach mechuber. It became built. The only time it's enu b'chiyutan is only because you wanted to protect it from getting ruined. However, let's say you want to get wet, so then it would be b'chiyutan. So we have a stira. So Rabbi Lazar Tavra, you're right. This is actually a shtickle sabruchin. Mi sheshanazu or shanazu. One who learned this can't learn this. So says Rashi, Kasha hachreish l'seifa v'trei tanoim ninhu. You're right. It's a machlos tanoim. Mar chashiv le tolush l'hai kaisel. One will consider this wall like it's tolush, and therefore, if it was for the sake of getting the wall wet, so then in that situation, even though it was tolush l'sei mechuber, it's considered like tolush in that it's b'chiyutan. Mar chashiv le mechuber, mar chashiv le tolush hoyav l'la mechuber mi karai. Since it wasn't originally mechuber and you built it afterwards, shikvar hayavanav talushais, let's say it was made out of stones, your wall, and they were detached, and then you attach them to make them to a wall, so therefore it's tolush of mechuber, that's considered like tolush, and therefore it's going to be machshir. The other one says no. So therefore that could be a machlokas tanoim when it comes to hechsher zerayim. Now Papa Eimer no. Kulachad tanahu. Really it's not a machlokas tanoim. Haba kaisel mara, haba kaisel binyan. It all depends on what type of wall we're talking about over here. If we're talking about a wall which is made from a cave, so a cave is just like a mountain, which means it wasn't that it was tolush mechuber, it was always mechuber, because that's what a cave is. A cave was there since sheshes made bracious, just like a mountain. So therefore, certainly in that situation, it's not going to be machshir. However, if we're talking about a regular house, so of kaisel binyan, then Taki, you're right. Then in fact it would be, if you wanted it to get wet, then it would be chiyuta. The halachah, that's how you read it. Hakayfa kaira al kaisel, you put this plate against the wall b'shil shetudach, that the kaira should get wet. Harizeh b'chiyutan, which is masha habishvil sheyidach kaisel. If the intention was for the wall, ein zeh b'chiyutan. That it doesn't work is because a cave wall is considered to be mechuber. In the only time it's not b'chiyutan is only in a situation where you mamish didn't want the wall to get ruined. However, because when it comes to a binyan, even though it's mechuber now, but it's tolush la'achar mechuber, so maybe in that case there would be b'chiyutan, and therefore Taka would not necessarily be a machlokas. Tanoim. Question 9. Ezo halachim in hilchos shchitas Chulin nilman mikra d'chsev be'Avraham b'parshas Hakeda. That we need a knife, and the knife is to be tolush. Again, not everyone holds like that. Maybe mechuber also works according to the other sheet as we saw. Okay. See another question. Not question T13. We'll get to that. Okay, let's keep moving. Boy Rabbi. So Rabbi asked the following question as we continue to test Zion Amud Beis. He asked the following question. So if it was detached and then it became attached into the wall in shchita mai. So if you have a knife which is tolush, and then you stick it into the wall, and now it's mechuber, it's stuck in the wall, can you do shchita with that? So Tashma, let's say you have a rock which is protruding from a wall. Let's say you had, and apparently a rock was always there, or you have reeds that are coming up from the ground. So we see clearly that it doesn't work. So no, so again, we're talking about that it was always mechuber, like a wall, which is a cave. A reed that came up by itself. What does that mean? It grew from the ground. It's still on the ground. It was never removed from the ground. So therefore, these are cases of mechuber. So mechuber will not work. But tolush will say mechuber. Maybe it does. So tolshma, not sakin b'kaisel. Let's say you have a knife stuck into the wall, which again is a case of tolush v'achakach mechuber. V'shachad ba, and you shecht with this knife that just stuck into the wall. So shchita s'kshera. So shchita does work. So we clearly see it's okay. For instance, well, shani sakin dulmavatale. Maybe only a knife in the wall is tolush because it isn't bottled to the wall. It's okay, fine. It was tolush and it's stick in the wall, mechuber, but it's a knife, so the knife is not bottled to the wall. So maybe that's not necessarily raya to all cases. Toshma, but mechuber lekarka. Let's say something which is mamish mechuber to the ground. Shchita s'kshera. We see clearly it's still good. It's Dilma Prushika Mafarishla. Maybe it's going to explain. My mechuber lekarka. What is an example of mechuber to the ground? Sakin delo mavatala. Now maybe it's referring to a knife that you're not mavatal. Amar, not sakin b'kaisel. You stick a knife into the wall. The shachabah shchitas kshera. Amar Rabbanan Amar Shmuel lo shanu. The only time they say the shchita actually works is ella shasakin lamal v'tzaver behem lamata. So you have the knife up here, and you have the animal here, and that's how the animal's being shechted. So you don't have the pressure, as we're going to see in a second, of hadrasa, or this issue, going this. If this is the animal, it's pushing all of its weight on it, and therefore may not be a good shchita. But if the animal's on the bottom, it's not a problem of this. So el lo shanu. However, El maybe pressing on the animal that won't be kosher. V'hakatani ben shasakin lamata v'savor behem lamala. Bein shasakin lamala v'savor behem lamata. We learned actually it's not true. That even if the animal's on the top, it's still kosher. So the Gemara gives a couple answers. Amar Rav Zvid, what's stud in Katani? You read it on sides like this. Sakin lamata v'tzaver behem lamala betolish. The only time it would work is if, even though the knife is on the bottom and the animal's on the top, is if it's tolush. The knife is totally detached, so you're moving the knife, so it's not an issue of shema yidrais, because you're the one that's moving the knife. However, if it was mechuber, then it would be a problem. Sakin lamala v'saver behem lamata b'mechuber. You could still do mechuber provided that the animal is below. Answer number one. Rapapa Eimer b'oifa de kol. Another simple answer is kol. A simple answer is a bird. So a behemoth you don't want on top because that's Shema Yidros. But a bird on the top, because it's light, it's not so hard to manipulate because it's so light, so there won't be an issue of Shema Yidros. Okay, fine. Let's look at couple of questions. Look at TA13. TA13. Not sakin b'kaisel v'shachem b'oifen shein chashash derusa mahadin umadua. So if you stuck a knife into the wall and you shecht it in a way there's no issue of derusa, what's the din? So he says kosher. O mishum the tolush u'b'soif chibru kitolush dami. O mishum do mavatale. Either because tolush u'b'soif mechuber is okay, or it's not an issue, or because fine, that's what it says over here. Ma'adin shani sakin delo mavatal as a sakin l'kaisel zetosh b'sav v'chiber shehu kosher. Good. Question TA14. Sakin l'mata v'sav v'mehema matai hashchita kshera umatai psul umadua. So I wrote habehema shehu yakar, which is heavy, zeh posum emneshesh drasa. alasakin. Avul oifai shehim koil afil or lamala ein chayshim zevulei v'zeh kosher. And or you would say let's studin, right? Let's studin, which is tolush. Tolush. If the sakin is detached, so then afilu, even if the behema is lamala, is kosher. Okay. So that's what we're looking for that. That's two questions, like right back. Tes vav, tes zayin, amud beis, tes zayin, amud beis. Okay. Tes zayin, amud beis, tes zayin, amud beis. Okay, good. Question TB17. Sakin amad b'savol matla. Same question. Tet zayin, amud beis. TB17. Let's see what I wrote. Hopefully I wrote it better here. Ksheru ba'of shu kolil b'tolush pasol b'behema shu kaved v'doris al sakin v'gama mechuber. Okay, all right. I think I explained it clearly, and that's good. All right, let's keep on moving then. Okay, so let's keep on moving. So, Omer Rav Chisda, Omer Rav Yitzchak, V'yirmo, some says b'mas nisatana, hey devarim nemru b'kroimi shulkana. There's 5 things that were said about a reed. Let's see what this is. First of all, ein shaychten ba. You're not able to shech. So Rashi says, Kuhu mishum shechashadaychen oisem kismin. That there's going to be like splinters that are going to be popping out of these reeds, and that's going to end up causing problems, making holes, and all this stuff. So you can't shecht with it. V'ein molen ba. Can't do a milah with it, and that's because you can create a krashavcha. You can cause the person to not be able to grow up and have children. Ve'in molen ba. Ve'in mechadchin ba basar. You can't cut meat with it because there's going to be all these like things stuck in it, and it could be dangerous when you eat it. Ve'in mechatzin ba shinayim. You shouldn't clean your teeth with it. You can like hurt yourself. Ve'ein mekanchin ba. You also can't wipe yourself because you may get karkashna. It can cause issues with your digestive tract. So ain't shaychten ba. So it says you can't shecht. V'osani b'chol shaychten. Ben b'sor ben b'schuz ben b'krom shel kana. What do you mean? It says b'ferish you could shecht with this. So my papa b'tzimuna da'agma. What's that? It says Rashi, it's a special type of grass that grows in the swamp, and when it's dry, it's very sharp. And it cuts. Splinters don't come out from it. So it's you have to obviously know the type of reed that we're talking about you can use. He actually would cut out and cut up these pieces, the innards of fish, the zigi, because they were like glass. They were very clear to see. So if there was any splinters that would come out, he would be able to see it, and therefore wasn't a problem. Rabba bar Rav Huna machatich ba oifa derachich. He used to cut meat which was soft. So therefore, again, it wasn't really a big deal. You didn't have to really cut it so hard. It wasn't really so. Therefore, no splinters would come out there either. Okay, obviously, just got to be careful. So typically, if you use something which can cause like a fiery feeling underneath when you're wiping oneself after relieving themselves, sheet of nitrice, the tissues of the rectum can be removed. It can basically cause a lot of damage. We're talking about wiping a wound, not wiping the bottom area of a person, because that certainly is definitely dangerous. You have to be very careful what you're using to wipe oneself. But even to wipe a wound, that's what we're referring to. Hakol shaychtin, Hakol shaychtin, hakol b'shchita, It means everything you do shechita with, even with a bird. Oyom shaychtin, what does that mean? Always. So Mantana, Sama Rabbi Shmuel, Hidasanya. The pasuk says, Ki yarchav Hashem Elokecha eskavelucha, when I've widened your boundary, kasher divrei yamarta oichla basa v'gaimer. And over there it says that you're supposed to you eat meat. Rabbi Shmuel Omer Loba HaKasav. So what's this pasuk telling us? It's only coming El Lahata Lehem Basar Taiva. It's coming to tell you that a person is allowed to eat Basar Taiva, which means regular meat. Now, it's not necessarily linked to a mitzvah, to a carbon, but nonetheless, it is still allowed, says Rashi. Kishiyavo Aretz. Once you enter Eretz Yisrael, Yochel Echel Basar L'Teyavoin Below Shum Hakrava. Even though it's not like a shlomim where you could eat it after you've already been makriv, certain parts are given to the kohen, even if nothing, just stam, chulin can be shechted. Why? Shebedechila, because while we were in the midbar, in the times of the Mishkan, neselahem basar taiva, we actually were not allowed to just stam eat whatever meat we wanted, right? It had to be, again, like a shlomim or something like that, and then you could eat the pieces afterwards. However, once we entered Israel, then we could eat even chulin meat. Now that we're in exile, so maybe we should just say, we shouldn't be allowed to eat meat. Pretty unbelievable thing, but that's the truth. And this is brought down elsewhere that maybe we should, certainly because of an element of, because of the churban, we shouldn't eat meat or drink wine. So that's why it says to tell us that even though you're right, some say Gemara elsewhere says it's a gzera sharev Yisrael ein yichol lamed ba. You can't keep such a, they're not going to give such a gzera. So that's what it means. Oylam shaychten. Okay, let's look at question 10. From when were they commanded about shechting chulin? So from the time they entered, according to this, from the time they entered Eretz Yisrael, according to one Madeir, after only after Zayin the Kibush, after 7 years of conquering the land, the Kaidim Kanisas and La'aretz, Rabbi Shmuel Hay Oyster B'Basar Taiva B'Kiba Haysa Nachrisan Shchitasan. Okay, we have a little bit more to go, but that's a little bit of the beginning of this, and we'll see some of this also in the next stop. Okay, so Masker Rav Yosef. It shouldn't just say shechting, because we always were able to shecht. It should say that you can shecht and eat. That's question number one. But mikar my taima itzer. What was the whole reason initially in the time of the Mishkan, in the midbar, that we weren't allowed to have? Mishum dahavi mikar Mishkan, because we had the Mishkan, says Rashi. Vayuchon lekarv karbanos mikol basar tavasan yakrivu hadam v'chela v'vada v'achol habasar. So it makes sense, because why if we should just bring a carbon, it can just be makar of some blood or whatever, and then you can eat all the meat. My time so ishtru davi mercharkim mishkan. So why at the end, what would be the reason? Why are we mattering it in Eretz Yisrael? Because we're far away from the Mishkan, says Rashi. Right? We do have the Sholosh Regalim, but other than that, you can't expect a person every time they want to have dinner, they have to go to Yerushalayim to bring a carbon, right? So that's the reason why they were matter. But Kol Shekain, if that's the case, Yud Zayin Amud Aleph, Hashda Derachiku Hutzvei. We're in Golos, we're in the United States, we're in New York, we're all over the place. So of course we're rachik. And we're not just rachik, there's no Beis HaMikdash. So why would we think that it would be Basar Taiva would not be allowed nowadays? Of course it should be allowed nowadays. What other option is there? Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Kiva, when you're far away, and you bring offerings of cattle and sheep. So what does Rabbi Kiva learn from here? Rabbi Kiva Omer, it's actually coming to tell you that there's an isser of nechira. Nechira is basically just cutting open an animal without doing shchita, like tearing it open. So this whole pasuk is just telling you that there's an isser of basar nechira. You have to do shchita. Shabbatchila hotum lehen basar nechira. Originally in the midbar, they actually were able to just rip animals apart and eat it. Right? It says Rashi Ksiv ki yirchak v'zavachta b'chol de'ad hashna lunin stavel azvicha. It says the word v'zavachta, which is mashma before there was not a chiyuv of doing zvicha. It was only later on. So it must be that nechira was actually allowed before. Which in Nicholas Oretz nesel lehem basar nechira. You weren't allowed to do basar nechira. Yashav shegol yochel yasu lahatir and harishain that you can do nechira. L'kach shenidol olam sheichten. Always you have to do shchita, which means that no matter what, even nowadays where there's maybe you would think originally there was nechira, we allowed nechira, so maybe we'll allow nechira again. No, it has to be shchita. Now let's look at questions, and we're going to stop there, but this is the answer. One shot is that when we entered Eretz Yisrael, that's when basar taiva was allowed. Rabbi Kiva says that it's referring to the nechirasan. The point is the nechira. Okay, I don't think we completely finished this question. We have a little bit. We're going to see this more tomorrow. Let's see, maybe one more question over here. TA 15 no, TB 18 Adkan.